Hello, I'm Anna Huysse, the founder of Hashimoto Help Initiative. Hashimoto Help Initiative has started with one individual, me, searching for answers to release my own suffering. Later, I shared my success with clients with autoimmune disease in my practice. All the successful stories urged me to initiate an online platform, Hashimoto Help, where more people can be reached and helped. For today's seminar, we have a very special guest, Paul Gilbert. Paul is a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Derby and consultant clinical psychologist of Derbyshire Healthcare Foundation Trust. He has researched evolutionary approaches to psychopathology for over 35 years, with a special focus on shame and treatment of shame-based difficulties, from where actually the compassion-focused therapy was developed. He's written about 20 books and more than 200 scientific papers, and he was awarded an Order of British Empire in March 2011. In 2006, he established a Compassion Mind Foundation, a charity with a mission statement to promote well-being through scientific understanding and application of compassion. A great teacher also, and a wise person. I'm very thankful, Paul, for your openness to be here today.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I'm delighted to be invited. Yes.
Probably people would wonder why and what has self-criticism to do with immunity or autoimmune system. Shall we start with that?
Sure.
Yeah. What is your? I think that the research there is still in infancy. We have to learn more about it. But what our assumptions are, and what do we know about it?
Yes. Okay, so let me start at the beginning then. So we have a recently evolved mind that gives us the opportunities for self-monitoring and thinking and anticipating and planning. In other words, our mind is different from the mind of other animals. If you imagine a zebra running away from a lion, the moment they've got away, because they can't see or smell or hear the zebra anymore, then their systems, their stress system will settle down. But for humans, we can start monitoring. We can think, can you imagine if I'd been caught? Oh my goodness, and what about tomorrow? So we hold stimulus in mind. Now this is important because the way your mind focuses has a big impact on your body. So we have an evolved mind that can hold a stimulus in mind, like the lion and what's going to happen tomorrow, but that will impact our bodies. So I'll give you an example. Supposing that you are very hungry and you see a beautiful meal, this will stimulate your hypothalamus, and then you'll have stomach acids and saliva. But you might not have any money, so you might just imagine a beautiful meal. So what you imagine can also stimulate your hypothalamus. An easier example is that if you see something erotic and sexy on the television, that could stimulate your pituitary to release hormones in your body that will give you arousal. But you could also just lay in bed and fantasize. Why is this important? It's important because it establishes the principle that humans can generate stimuli in their mind that then stimuluses in the mind that then stimulate their bodies. Now, this is very important because if we think about self-criticism, self-criticism is basically a threat signal. So if you imagine somebody telling you that you're no good or you've messed up or nobody's going to like you, that signal will stimulate your threat system and will release cortisol. It'll have an impact on your sympathetic nervous system and so on and so on. And over time, if people keep putting you down, you're going to feel pretty depressed and anxious. Also, if you're bullied and stressed in that way, as you know, this will affect your immune system, your cardiovascular system, and so on. The point is, however, is it doesn't actually matter whether it's somebody else or whether you're creating it in your own head. If you're doing it in your own head, you are still stimulating these stress systems in your body. And we've done some scanning studies where we've actually looked at people, put them into a scanner, and we've looked at their brains while they are being self-critical or self-reassuring. And we've shown that different parts of the brain light up according to whether somebody is being critical or self-reassuring. So self-criticism is very important because it is physiologically extremely powerful, and it can have an impact on your body and your stress system and your immune system.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And probably for those who are thinking what it is about stress system, you're referring to basically to the three affiliative systems, where we're talking about threat system and the soothing system and the drive system.
Yes. Okay. So let's step back a little bit then. So we've established that humans have a way of holding the stimulus in your head. There was a wonderful book written by Robert Sapolsky called "Why Don't Zebras Get Ulcers?", making basically this point that we hold things here, and because we hold things in our heads, we can constantly stimulate our body in a certain kind of way. So now let's look at what are we stimulating, and you then bring in the issue about the threat system and the drive system. Now, we take an evolutionary function analysis to emotions. And what that means is that we think about emotions not in terms of specific emotions, but in terms of the function of emotion. So threat emotions and threat systems are designed to pick up on things that are threatening to you and activate your body, preparing your body to take actions. And that's called a threat system. Now, that system is very easy to stimulate because it's designed to be easy to stimulate. It's very easy to condition. And when it's active, usually it's designed for fairly quick running away or taking actions and so on and so on. So the idea of the threat system is primarily designed to come on quickly, but also to go away reasonably quickly when the stimulus is gone. The problem is, though, as you've just said, is that if for humans the stimulus doesn't always go, because you hold it in your head, you worry and you think and you go round and round in your head. As far as we know, chimpanzees don't worry about the mortgage or what their children are going to do, or whereas humans do. So this threat system, which is designed to come on and go off relatively quickly, it can be maintained. We call that chronic stress or high levels of stress, and self-criticism is a stimulus for this. But you also, you mentioned, have two positive emotion systems. Now, one positive emotion system, the function of the system is to encourage you to go out and do things, to achieve things, to acquire things. So this is a system that gives you excitement. This is what we call, this is linked to dopamine in particular, but not only dopamine. So for example, if you won the European lottery and you were worth 100 million euros, you would have a big buzz of dopamine and you'd become very excited. You wouldn't be able to sleep. You'd be mildly hypomanic. So this is an excitement system. This is an activation system linked to the sympathetic system and so on and so on. And the quality of the emotion is excitement and so on. But you also have another type of positive emotion, which is linked to soothing, calming, and contentment. And this is not activation, this is deactivating. This is linked to the parasympathetic system, which is sometimes called rest and digest. And that is a system of feeling, say, contented and peaceful and just pleasantly chilled out. So you're not activated and excited, you're able to sleep and so on. Now this system is very important because, well, all of the systems really, but this system is also linked to affection and affiliation. It's also linked to the quality of relationships that we have. So when people are kind to us, it activates that parasympathetic, the vagal nerve actually, and that calms us down. So if you have a child who's very distressed and they turn to their parent and their parent speaks to them kindly and nicely and so on, and that stimulates the parasympathetic system, which then down regulates the stress and the child calms down, feels better. So these two systems, these two positive systems are very important, and they regulate the threat system in different ways. The system that you're particularly interested in, I think, is the soothing system that's linked to the vagal nerve, the ventral dorsal aspect of, so the ventral aspect of the parasympathetic system, because that, the vagus nerve, is also linked very intimately to your immune system. So if the vagal nerve isn't working so well, then the immune system tends to go off as well. And therefore, that leads you into this idea that if you're self-critical, you're stimulating the threat system, but if you become self-compassionate, then you're going to stimulate the vagal system, the soothing system, this calming system, and that's good for not only your mental health, but also your immune system too.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What I found with the clients that I work with is that the history of people with Hashimoto, or in general with autoimmune diseases, they very often have an early traumas or traumatic experiences, which actually, as if we run our life on threads. And this is easily conditioned, as you said. So even when people are, and often conditioning between the threat system and the soothing system. So if you try to reach the soothing system, people go to threat emotions, which makes it quite difficult. And the point is what you can do about it. How people work themselves alone with the exercises with compassion, because we do all understand cognitively that it's good. So it is not the point that people don't get it. People understand that it's very good for them to be compassionate or to be soothing for themselves, to stay open for the goodness of others, to receive, to give to others. But it is quite challenging for people with autoimmune diseases. The self-criticism very high, the hostility turned toward themselves. What is your experience? And
okay, well, there's about 3 or 4 different questions there, and so if I just sort of cork them first. Although people intellectually can understand that compassion is useful, we've actually done a lot of research showing that people are resistant to it. They have what we call fears, blocks, and resistances. Now, fears are, well, I'd like to be compassionate, but actually, I don't think I deserve it, or I don't think it's going to work for me, right? So they would like it, but they're frightened to do it. Or when I start to become compassionate to myself, it just makes me feel very sad, because when I'm compassionate to myself, it reminds me of how lonely I am, or how much in pain I am, or how difficult my life has been. Because compassion sometimes reduces dissociation, it reduces your ability to keep pain at a distance. You kind of encompass it more. So sometimes when people begin working with compassion, they become more sensitive to their distress, and that can be difficult for them, sometimes even overwhelming. Then other people have what we call resistances to it. They think it's stupid. They think it's weak. You know, it's no, how on earth is this going to help me? I'm not frightened of it. I can't see the point of it, you know. So sometimes you have men who think it's all about being tough and all this stuff. And then you have blocks, which is that people would like to be, but they're not able to for one reason or another. They're not resistant, they're not frightened. But for example, nurses working in a hospital that's very, very busy, they would like to be more compassionate to their patients and have more time, but they're just too busy, you know, the demands on them are too much. Sometimes people say, well, I'd like to be more compassionate, but I'm rushing around all the time trying to sort out my family, blah, 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 blah. So it's not a resistance and pushing away, and it's not a fear. It's a kind of, it's a block, because you can't actually create the space and the time to do what you need to do. So those 3 things require a slightly different type of engagement, really. Excuse me. So then the next thing that you asked about is that how do people deal with the other aspects? Well, when you have a chronic illness that's really messed up your life, you know, there are 2 major emotions, or 2 major processes that are involved. First is anger. Well, 3 actually, all 3. First is anger, why me, and it's not fair, and all of the stuff, and just really angry at how life has robbed you of the things that other people seem to have and so forth. So that anger, that rage can sometimes be a reason that people don't want to do compassion, because really I'm just very angry. Then the second one is anxiety. What does this mean for my future? And the third one, of course, is grieving. And grieving for what's been lost is extremely important, and that also can be very difficult for people. So working with compassion, then sometimes, even though people logically know, yes, this would be a good thing to do, there are all kinds of fears and resistances and unprocessed emotions which get in the way. And as a therapist, we often work a lot with the fears, blocks, and resistances. That's a lot of what our work is about, actually.
Yeah.
Now, the next question you asked is, can people do it by themselves? Well, this is when it's quite useful to understand a little bit about the physiology of soothing, the physiology of affiliation, physiology of affection, because there are various postures that one can use. So, for example, when you are under threat, your body curls inwards, your shoulders go inwards like this to protect your core. Whether you're angry or whether you're anxious, the body turns inward. So compassion postures, then you lift the shoulders and you go backwards like this, and you open up the diaphragm. When you do that, you'll notice your back slightly curves. You have a slight curve in your back, right? Whether you're walking or whether you're sitting. So this movement backwards like this. Then you open up your diaphragm here, okay? And when you do that, then you can slow your breathing around 5 breaths per minute. So you're breathing in, filling your lungs slowly, and letting the air go down into the diaphragm, and then gently out again. Now, when you breathe at around 5 breaths per minute, okay, you have to focus on the rhythm of the breath. So you're coming, breathing in smoothly, holding gently, and breathing out smoothly. That's the first thing. And sometimes you need to build up to that. Sometimes people can only do 3 or 4 second breaths. You need to build up to that. So the rhythm of the breath, the number of the breaths per minute, and the amount of air you take in, and the posture in which you do the breathing, all of these things are quite important, because if you practice, they will stimulate the vagal nerve. This type of breathing will stimulate the vagal nerve and help with this soothing system. When that system is operating, that has an impact on the immune system, but it also has an impact on a lot of other things going on in your brain, and it makes compassion much easier. When you're stressed out and you're all curled up and your diaphragm is blocked up and you're trying to breathe and all that, nothing's going to happen. So when you're doing compassion training for yourself, posture, breath, and focus. So the next thing then is, as we've said, you can create stimuli in your brain that will stimulate your body. So if you're laying in bed thinking something very sexy, that will stimulate sexual feelings. But supposing that you create images of compassion. So we have a lot of exercises where we teach people particular kind of images. So there are one form of images called compassionate imagery, where you actually imagine a compassionate person and you imagine the qualities that you would like them to have. And then you practice on a regular basis imagining this person having compassion for you and how they will speak to you. You practice compassionate voice tones, because when people are critical, the voice tone is hostile and angry. So you practice creating a voice tone, imagining this figure being compassionate to you with a very compassionate voice tone, compassionate facial expression. Now, some people say, oh yeah, but it's not real. Well, it doesn't matter, because the point is just like laying in bed fantasizing a sexual thing. It doesn't have to be real. You're doing it because you want to stimulate these bodily systems. And if you do that over a period of time, then they get stronger. Mm-hmm. So the compassion coming in is very, very important. And the second aspect of compassion is what we call the compassionate self, which is imagining yourself as a compassionate being. So if you're angry or stressed, take a moment to do the breathing, take the posture, and just imagine if you were at your most compassionate in this moment, you're at your wisest, your strongest, your calmest, how would you be? How would you like to deal with this moment, this difficulty? From the position of the most compassionate person you can imagine being, so that you becoming, right? And we find that if people practice that, they are able to notice, sometimes if they're getting very angry or very anxious, just to stop, take the breath, slow down, and then focus on the kind of self they would ideally like to be. Now, this is important because this is working with people's intention. My intention is to try to bring compassion into my life. My intention is to be at my wisest, my strongest, my most compassionate with whatever difficulty I feel. And then the third element of it is compassion for others. And there's quite a lot of evidence now that compassion for others, being compassionate to others, is also very good for us, both emotionally and our bodies. So when you say to me, can people practice this? Yes, there are a whole series of practices that people can do. They can practice the breathing, the postures, the focusing, the imagery. They can practice becoming a compassionate self. They can practice compassionate actions. So there is quite a few things that people can practice. It all obviously helps if you're in an environment where people are compassionate to you. And so sometimes it's quite important in a family or in a couple to talk about how we create compassionate conversations or compassionate interactions. For example, how often do people greet each other in a friendly way? So when people come back from work, how often do they say, hello, how's your day been? Right? Smiling face, friendly voice, right? Rather than just coming in and checking this case down, something like that. So teaching people to have these micro moments of connectedness, and again, Barbara Fredrickson has done a lot of work on this, in a couple is very, very important. And if you look at couples that are happy, what they do is they create lots of micro moments of interaction where they say, hello, my love. Hello, darling. How are you, my sweetheart? You know, love of my life, moon in my sky. So they have all of this sort of friendly, affectionate language, and that all the time is stimulating areas of the brain. You know, when you hear that, when you see that, you hear that facial expression, you're getting little buzzes of oxytocin and dopamine all the time, as if you're having a relationship where people are not sharing feelings, they're just, well, you know what I think about you, don't you? All that stuff. Then you're not getting the signals. So, as I say, there is quite a lot that we can do in terms of training people to stimulate these compassion pathways, which will have a major impact on how their bodies work.
Yeah, and I think I'm grateful that you brought this point, because when you have an autoimmune disease, it influences really your relationships at work, at home, with yourself, your whole life and all areas of your life. And it might be that not just the person itself, the people who are themselves sick, but also to bring awareness to the people in their relationships, that they might be to show much more compassion and understanding what they're going through.
Yeah, it's very much
positive environment to bring. Yeah, we can deal with all the stress also the disease is bringing in a different way. And you talk about the 3 systems, so you can use the threat system, or you can use the drive system, or you can use the soothing system to respond to stress. And I think very often we don't make a conscious choice which system we would use. We step in what we've learned and what became a habit for us. And what I've seen is by Hashimoto's is that very often the overdrive system, so the perfectionistic characteristics of the people with Hashimoto are there. And in our society, we see it as a very positive thing. And it is stimulated to be a good worker or be perfectionistic, but it plays habits with people in life. And certainly when it is compensating for insecurities and problems with self-esteem, so it is related to the threat system. Would you want to say something about it?
I think it's a great point, right? I think one always has to be slightly cautious about, how people have learned to cope with tragedy, because these are tragedies, and some people do cope with tragedy by throwing themselves into actions and doing things and having a cause or doing well at work. And to some extent, that's probably very helpful to them. But even if you do that the problem with too much drive is that you can become critical if you can't keep going. When you become tired and you can't do it anymore, then the critic. So the problem is not really the drive, it's what happens when you're not really able to keep going and you can't do it anymore. Can you be compassionate to yourself in those times? So using activities and achievement to help you with a life that you're struggling with, that can be useful, but everything is in balance, right? And the most important thing is that if that's working for you, and if you're able to live a happy life doing that because you have meaning and purposeful and so forth, that's okay. But the key thing is what happens when you get exhausted and you get tired, as you will do in these conditions, and you can't do it anymore. Then you become frustrated and angry with yourself. And that's the bit to watch out for. It's what happens when the drive system doesn't work for you anymore. And much more vulnerable to experience failures of drive through exhaustion and so on when you have a chronic health condition.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is the tragedy is also that certainly when people are going to the general practitioner, what all the symptoms look like very often in the early stages, at least, as a psychiatric problem, starting from depression. People get diagnosed with clinical depressions or borderlines, or even with psychotic system as a schizophrenic. So and often in a very high dosages with medication. It is scary and very tragic, I think, what is going on, until later in life people might be diagnosed when the thyroid gland is completely not functioning, diagnosed with Hashimoto thyroiditis. There is now a study at Maastricht University that they are stating that a lot of this psychiatric diagnosis can be explained with autoimmune dysfunction. Do you see it in your with so long time in your practice? Have you seen this pattern of when the problem is actually not in there is no psychiatric problem?
Well, yes, I think that the point about it is that it's like you making a distinction between syndromes, observing a syndrome, okay, and observing and then having the concept of what's causing that syndrome. So if you're diagnosing, say, depression, you're just observing a set of symptoms that tend to go together. But those symptoms can have a variety of causes, right? Thyroid dysfunction, early onset cardiovascular disease, diabetes, many physical conditions can actually have symptoms of depression, right? So that's certainly the case, and you can misdiagnose on the basis of trying to identify a cause. The issue for autoimmune diseases is two things, really. Firstly, there's the depressing effects of having a chronic illness in the first place, which is pretty depressing, that's the thing. But also the inflammatory responses that are associated with the condition are now known to interact with a whole lot of neurological systems that are also linked to depression. So you've got two elements going on there. The inflammatory response, which has been associated with depression now, and not just the kind of autoimmune disease you're talking about, but depression in general seems to be related to the inflammatory processes. But you've also then got the second element, which is being depressed because your life is being significantly limited because of the problem that you've got. You might also be in chronic pain as well. So we make a distinction between the symptoms that the person's got and what might be causing those symptoms. Now, one of the problems with psychiatric diagnosis is they have very simple concepts of cause, and that's why they give antidepressants, because they think that if they give an antidepressant that affects the serotonin system or the noradrenaline system or whatever, all will be fine. But that isn't the case. And new treatments, looking at things like the anti-inflammatories for depression, and we'll see where that leads us.
Yeah, by the Hashimoto's, there are a lot of now confirmation that also the repression is a very often used, those with Hashimoto thyroiditis use repression. And the relationship between repression and the high antibody titers is well confirmed.
Yeah.
So the sort of personality traits and the disease are not coming in our life. There is also relationships. I think it's very difficult indeed to say where something starts and where it ends. Where is
absolutely.
But it is sometimes can be very sad what people are making in their life not to be diagnosing on time and getting really an diagnosis that sort of stigmatize them and influence their lives, and they get on higher medication. This is what I just wanted to bring and discussion. Do you want to say something more about self-critic? Because self-critic can be what makes self-critic so difficult to connect to?
To connect you.
Yeah, to connect to. That we find it so difficult to connect to our self-critic sometimes. What makes it difficult? What might be the barriers there to go into?
What, to give up self-criticism?
Yes. Yeah.
It's difficult to give it up. Okay, so there are lots of reasons why it's difficult to give it up. I mean, I'll give you an example that we sometimes use about where self-criticism begins can have an impact on how easy it is to give it up. Now, 1,000 years ago, more than that probably, there were societies in South America called the Incas and the Aztecs. And they believed that were gods that could control things, right? And so in order to stop the gods being horrible and get them to send the rains and that, they would sacrifice to the gods. So they sacrificed the gods in order for the gods to be nice to them. But what happens if, after all the sacrifices, the rains still don't come? The gods are not nice to them, right? What do? Do they blame the gods? Do they say, look, we sacrificed all these virgins and people to you. Where's the rains? You know, you're cheating on the deal, right? They don't do that. What they do is they blame themselves. They say, what did we do wrong? What have we done wrong? Did we not do enough? So when you are confronted by others who can hurt you or help you, and you are in the subordinate or the weak position, if they do hurt you or not help you, you tend to blame yourself. Now, this is true for children too. So we see it in religions all the time. People say, what have I done to upset you, God, that you would do this to me, right? That is a power dynamic, right? It's just typical because subordinates are very frightened to blame dominance. It's a dominant-subordinate relationship. So you get that in religion, but you also get it in children, where children become very self-blaming if the parent is unpredictably aggressive towards them. What did I do, Mummy? What did I do? How did I upset you? Why did you hit me? So that's one aspect of it, that people can be very frightened to give up self-blaming because they've learned self-blame as a safety strategy early in life. Okay, so they're not, and that means they can't deal with that up-rank anger. They can't deal with the anger towards authority usually. So self-blamers usually have a problem with anger towards authority. Another reason is because we live in a culture that sort of teaches it, really, that teaches us to be self-critical. It'll say things like, don't sit back on your laurels and make sure you drive yourself on and never be satisfied with just being average, blah, blah. So when we do studies of self-criticism, we often find that people are reluctant to give them up because they think it's good for them. I need to be self-critical because it stops me from being lazy, or it keeps me on my toes, or it stops me from making mistakes. So people find it quite difficult to imagine what it would be like to stop being self-critical. Now, this is important because the key thing about self-criticism is the emotions that are associated with self-criticism. Now, if you ask people to bring to mind something that they're critical about, just close your mind, close your eyes, bring something to mind you're critical about, and then you do three things. You ask them, that part of you that is criticizing you, what does it look like? Listen carefully to what it's saying. And the third thing is, what does it feel about you? And what people often discover when they do this is that the critic often looks quite hostile or even aggressive in some way. Sometimes it looks like a monster or something like that. When you listen carefully to what the critic is saying to you, it's usually saying pretty awful things, like you're no good, you're a loser, nobody loves you, you always mess up, you're, you know, all that stuff. So it's pretty hostile. And the critic is angry and contemptuous of you. It doesn't like you, doesn't take you very much. So you suddenly realize that what you thought was helpful to you actually is only making you feel bad, because when you've done the exercise and you ask people, so how do you feel now? You've met the critic, you've listened to it, and you see what it feels about you. Nearly everybody says, oh, I feel terrible, I feel depressed, right? So helping people understand that the critic, particularly the critic that's hostile and contemptuous, is not in your best interest. It will be stimulating areas of your brain that are to do with stress and depression and so on. But there is a part of you that will want the same things. In other words, there is a part of you that wants you to be at your best. It wants you to be wise and talented and hardworking. We call this the compassionate self. And so we can draw a distinction between compassionate encouragement and compassionate correction. Now, compassionate self-correction is where the ability where we are always clear that our intention is to do the best we can, generally. Most people wake up in the morning wanting to do the best they can. Very few people wake up wanting to do badly. No, you know, if you're a therapist, nobody wakes up and thinks, I think I'll be a bad therapist today and make everybody depressed. Right? Nobody wants to do that. So mostly people want to be a good parent, or a good therapist, or good at what they do. And it's only because of mistakes or frustrations that we get knocked off the path. So compassionate intention is holding you to the fact that basically you want to do the best you can, right? And if you make a mistake, you get angry or whatever it is, how do you get back onto the path of being the best you can as soon as you can? And that is using encouraging and empathic understanding. The critic won't do that. The critic will simply attack you and call you names and make you feel bad, whereas your compassionate self will really help you work with whatever difficulty you're facing. So the first thing with working with self-compassion is understanding its function. For some people, they've learned to be critical because that's how they were as children. It's a safety strategy. They can't deal with anger. For other people, they think they need to be critical. They deserve to be critical, or being critical will help them. And so you help people realize that actually, if you look at it, no, it isn't going to help you. And then you help people realize that actually follow your heart. You know, follow your intention, which is to do well, to be the best parent you can be, the best friend you can be, the best lover you can be, the best husband or wife. Just follow your heart. Trust in your intention. You know, because people seriously underestimate their goodness. They're very good at focusing on the negative, and they seriously underestimate their own goodness. We are flawed. We make mistakes. It doesn't always go well. But also recognize that for the most part, we want to do well.
Yeah, what I observed, I'm happy that you brought it, that it is used as a self-strategy by the Hashimoto thyroiditis patients very often, most often, and that this anger towards authority is so strong. But there is so much shame there. There is so much shame there that makes it very difficult to connect with self-critic. People find it very difficult alone to work with the self-critic, or to do the exercise alone without the support of someone. Now they're actually rebuilding this soothing system in the environment, in the therapeutic environments together. It's easier than just sitting alone and trying to do things, even with intention, motivation to do it. People find it quite difficult to do it on themselves.
Yes, very much so. I agree with that. Yes.
Yeah. Would you have some tips for people, what they can, you've mentioned several things like slow breathing that people might do themselves without the help of support of the professional that might help in the difficult moments, or making also physiological changes, not using some of the compassionate exercises.
Yes, I think one of the key things is something you mentioned earlier on. Look, if you decided you wanted to fix your car, or fix something in your house, or learn to swim, or whatever, the first thing you do is to find out about it. Right? So if you're going to fix a car, the first thing you need to do is, how does the engine work, right? Before you start doing anything. So the first stage really is, before you jump into doing any kind of exercises, is having some idea about why it's useful. How does my brain actually work? So having an understanding that how you think and what you think and where your emotions are really does influence your body. So once you understand it, right, you can see, then you see the point of it. If it's just somebody says, oh, you should be compassionate to yourself, you'll feel better, that ain't going to do anything. You really need to understand the detail of why these brain systems will influence your immune system. Well, may influence your immune system. Okay, it's not magic. It's not going to take it all away or anything like that, but they may have a little bit of an influence, okay, through the vagal system and so on. So once you understand what you're doing, you're much motivated to do it. And part of the problem is that with people, when they're on their own, is they don't have any guidance about why it's worth doing what they're doing, right? So they just try and pick up exercises willy-nilly, and that usually doesn't work. So the first thing then is clarity by listening to programs like this, maybe that you're making very brilliantly, about how does it all work? Why would this be useful? So then people can say, oh, yeah, I can see how that would work for me. I can see why the breathing is important. So I'm going to practice this every day. You know? That's what gives them the inspiration to practice, because they have insights, the importance of insight. If they just do it because somebody tells them that it's going to be useful, chances are that isn't going to stick. They need the insight. So the program that you're making here is to help people who don't have an opportunity to see a therapist, perhaps, but to have enough insight into understanding, oh yeah, if I do that, if I do the postures, if I do the breathing, if I create the friendly face, if I focus on the emotional tone of my thinking, if I practice friendly voice, if I try to meet every person and wish them well, this can actually have an impact on how my body works. Mm-hmm. So, you know, everybody you meet, just imagine wishing them well, wishing them happiness, just conscious note of, you know, I hope you're happy, you know, I hope you have a happy life, or whatever suffering you face, may you be able to face it and overcome. So having well wishes for other people is a Buddhist technique, but it's very useful, because what it means is that repeatedly, you're stimulating this compassion process in your brain, and that over time will have an impact on your frontal cortex and other systems. So yeah, so the key thing is firstly having insight into why you need to do these things, and then gradually finding the practices that fit you.
Yeah, I think the introduction of the compassion and focus therapy, where you go in psychoeducating,
yeah,
about the new old brain and how to practice. I see people really like have aha moments. They say, oh yes, and this the most beautiful part when they say it is not my fault.
That's right, absolutely.
It's so important part, and it opens doors to, and everyone can find a way which exercise suit me and when I can use it in the daily routine. But the psychoeducation is quite important.
Absolutely, Anna. Yeah, absolutely. And this concept you're bringing in is not your fault. All of us find ourselves here with a genetic framework, genetic pattern that we didn't choose. I didn't choose to be a man. You didn't choose to be a woman. We didn't choose to be white or black or whatever it is. We just found ourselves here. And some people have a reasonably good hand with a lot of aces and kings and are fit and healthy, but other people, through no fault of their own, get dealt not a very good hand of the genes. It's just gene mixing. And then on top of that, if you have trauma, as you mentioned, which can also influence how your brain and body matures, it's very, very tough. But the most important thing is, because it's your genes and because backgrounds shape who we are, it really is not your fault. All that goes on in our heads, whether it's our anger or hatred or our whatever it is, it's there because nature has allowed it to be there. We didn't put it there. We often don't want it. And this allowing ourselves to see it is not your fault. It is not your fault. You didn't choose it. You don't want it. But this is part of the human condition. And that some of us are lucky and some of us are not. And there is no rhyme or reason to it. It's just the way it is. And it's the true same for animals. Animals too. Some will be fit and healthy and some will die young from diseases. It is just the way it is. It's not your fault. It's pretty awful, but it's not your fault.
But from the other side, it is not my fault, but I can do something about it. And this is exactly where compassion comes.
That's right. That's right. In fact, because it's not my fault. Yes.
Seeing what it is there and feeling the urge to do something different and help.
Yes. And I think it's a wonderful point that you make. When people, we find many times, and I think you find the same thing, but when people stop blaming or feeling the shame for what's going on, then they're not hiding. They're not trying to hide and cover up. They accept it, right? And then they can take responsibility. Okay, it's not my fault, but I'm going to take responsibility, right? It's like somebody sold you a car where the brakes doesn't work. That's not your fault, okay? But if you keep blaming yourself for being so stupid, why did I do this? As opposed to, well, the thing I have to do is to kind of fix it as best I can, right? So what can I do? Given that nature has dealt me this hand, how can I play it? What's the best way to play a bad hand, right? So it's not my fault I got this hand, but now that I have, what's the best way to play this hand? So you're absolutely right. By giving up blaming and shaming, people are more likely to take responsibility to really make the best of what they got.
Yeah. Is there something that comes up to your mind as in what you would like to, for people who are really suffering, to tell them, to share more wisdom as in closure?
Yes, well, I think the point about it is, look, when people are suffering, they are in a different position to the people who are not. The people who are not are able to kind of live their lives with blinkers, right? But in reality, when you suffer, you see reality in a different way. The biological life is in a sense a tragedy, okay, that we're all passing through. We last for 20,000, 30,000 days, whatever it is, and we're just created by our genes. The key thing to remember is that we're all in this together. We're all part of the same boat. We don't know what will happen after the body dies. Who knows? Maybe there's something, maybe there's not. We just don't know. Okay, the universe is a strange place, really strange place. But while we're here, okay, it's recognizing that we are part of this system, and to make connections and the sense of connectedness, not only with me that is happening, but being a sense of common humanity that Kirsten Neff talks about. You may be talking to her later. This idea about my suffering is one with other people's suffering. I am one with others. We are all part of this. Nobody chose this. We didn't choose this. It's not our fault. And therefore, I'm going to have a sense of myself as being connected to other people who suffer in the world, and just like I wish them well, and I hope that they are able to deal well with their suffering, so I wish myself well. I'm going to do the best I can with my suffering because it's not my fault. So you have this common humanity sense that I will now, because of what's happened to me, I'm going to treat myself compassionately, because that is the most important thing I can do for me. If nature has given me a bad hand, I can play it well. Okay, I'm going to play my hand well. And one of the ways I will play the hand well is by becoming compassionate, because when I do that, I can stimulate brain systems and body systems that will help me. And I can, if I'm critical and hating, then that's going to be much more difficult. And I've got two problems. I've got the hand that nature's given me, and I'm not playing it very well. Okay, that's not my fault. I'm not playing it very well, but it'll just make me feel worse, really.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to mention that it meant a lot to me. From the moment I've come to compassion focused therapy, I got the training and I started doing on myself as a trainer. And when I was trained by you, and now with my clients, I really have on myself and my clients normal results with an inflammation decreasing using compassion focused therapy. I'm now starting a study, and I'm very curious what will come up of it. But I'm very positive that we can do a lot also to bring changes in our brains. We are not hopeless.
We're not hopeless, no, Anne. And it's a wonderful work that you're doing, and making these practices. Absolutely wonderful work that you're doing, because you're bringing people knowledge, you're bringing them hope, you're bringing them things that they can do and practice, and that will be very helpful. So you're doing a wonderful thing here.
Thank you for bringing compassion focused therapy.
Okay, thank you.
Wish you well and keep in touch.
Yes.
Bye.
Thanks, Anne. Bye-bye.
Bye.